Hi, I'm Mark Juergensmeyer from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and welcome to another in our series of conversations on Sikh Studies. This has been such an interesting and valuable series, which was established by my old friend and colleague, Narinder Singh Kapani, the founder of the Sikh Foundation. And shortly before his death, just a couple months ago, he called me up and asked me if I wouldn't moderate this series because he and I were involved in the first conference on Sikh Studies back in 1976, a long time ago. And since we helped inaugurate Sikh Studies then, and the purpose at that time was to try to figure out what was going on. And he said, Mark, the time has come to do it again. Only this time we'll do it on Zoom. And we'll just talk with different people in different areas of North America and England and just find out what's going on in the field. And that's what we've been doing. And it's just been so interesting and so valuable. And today we have a wonderful guest, Satwinder Kaur Bains from the University of Fraser Valley in British Columbia. And just before we want to begin, for those of you who are watching this live, you know that there was a tragedy in Indianapolis. And 4 of the 8 people who were killed in a just senseless shooting at a FedEx facility were Sikhs. And I don't know whether they were targeted or whether they just happened to be there, but it's a tragedy for the nation, but it's particularly a tragedy for the Sikh community. So I just wanted you to keep with your thoughts and your prayers, the family of those who were affected in this senseless tragedy. So Satwinder, now to happier things, and that's what you're doing in British Columbia. And may I say, you're in just one of the most beautiful parts of the world. I would think that every morning you go look out the window and you would say, how lucky am I to be in this beautiful location? But for those of us who, I've been to British Columbia, but I have to admit that Fraser Valley is an area near Vancouver, but not actually in the city. So you've got UBC right in the city, and you've got Simon Fraser right in the city. And then there's the University of Fraser Valley. So help locate us at the beginning so we all understand where you are, and then we'll talk about what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Juergensmeyer, for inviting me today, and thank you for people who are attending. I want to first acknowledge that I live and work on the territory of the Stolo people, the people of the river, and I give thanks to them for allowing us to live in this beautiful, unceded and ancestral land of theirs. And we work very hard to understand our own position as settlers on this beautiful Fraser Valley, as well as understanding the truth of the experiences of First Nations peoples and reconciling ourselves to that truth so we can move forward. So it's appropriate that you asked me to situate, where we are. And I want to say this beautiful valley is home to a very large South Asian population, Punjabi Sikh population, and it's about an hour away from Vancouver. It's a breadbasket of British Columbia, a very large agricultural community. We grow everything here. And we feed British Columbia through here. It's a very fertile plain. The river used to be very, very large. Now it's not as large, but it still feeds us. We have a fishing industry, an agricultural industry, a forestry industry that rely very heavily on the river. And so for our university to be named University of the Fraser Valley is very appropriate. The river is kind of the thread that goes through the cities that make up the Fraser Valley. So we are in the central Fraser Valley, about an hour from Vancouver. It's called the city in the country. We have about 150,000 people that live here and a very, very significant Punjabi population and a very historical Punjabi population. We have the oldest standing Sikh temple in the Western Hemisphere here in Abbotsford, and it's a National Historic Site. The site was designated as a historic site by a Prime Minister in 2007. And so the site is our living history. We have very few artifacts, as you know, but this site gives us a lot of courage to continue the work of our early settlers, and it's a touchstone for us around the history of the past. We just opened a Komagata Maru exhibit this week in Vaisakhi week, and I want to say happy Vaisakhi to everybody. And we are commemorating Sikh Heritage Month in BC and all across Canada. So the Fraser Valley is very, very significant for Sikhs and for history, in terms of history.
Yeah, I usually ask for breaking news, but I think you just gave it. These events that are coming up around the Komagata Maru incident, and also the recognition of the first Gurdwara. Of course, in California, we're proud of the Stockton Gurdwara, but even earlier than that, up in British Columbia, there was a thriving Sikh community before they came down to California. So that's a wonderful bit of history. And I know that you're interested in that. What's interesting to me about your research is that you're interested not just in contemporary Sikh community, but also the history and the way in which some of the important events of the past have helped to shape the present and will help to shape the future. So tell me about the university. So the university is, I know UBC and Simon Fraser, but I confess that I've never been to University of Fraser Valley. So tell me about it. Is it a newer university than UBC and Simon Fraser?
Well, BC has a very interesting history of universities and colleges. We have only two private universities in both are two private, three private universities in BC. There are very few private universities across Canada, but mostly we have colleges, and we used to have a thing called university colleges, and then we have universities. And the way British Columbia is laid out, because we're a very small population, the larger universities are in the hubs, the big cities, and Victoria, Vancouver, even now Prince George has a big university. But the regional universities, which is what Fraser Valley is, are really to respond to the regions, to keep people in the regions, not let them leave, like young people studying and working in the communities, staying in the communities. These were the regional universities. So we support about a radius of over 250 kilometers. People who live within a 250 kilometer radius come to our university mostly. We have 4 campuses. We even have a campus in India, in Chandigarh. And we have about 15,000 students. We are mostly undergraduate. We prepare students to go into graduate school and then to go to work. And it's a liberal arts as well. It's not where we have a sciences program, but mostly liberal arts. And we don't do, the way the regulations in British Columbia are laid out, only certain universities can have law schools or medical schools or schools of dentistry, etc. So we are applied research university. We don't get the funding that UBC and UVic and SFU get for research because we are mostly applied. But we respond to a very interesting local population. People come to the university because they're sometimes first-generation students. Their parents have never been to university. We have a large immigrant population, both of Mennonites and of Sikhs. So we have Sikh studies happening at UFE as well as Mennonite studies. So our focus is really to keep students within the region. And we're also a feeding university to, after 2 years, somebody may go to UBC or SFU to do their second 2 years and graduate from there and go on to grad school. So it's a very unique regional university with a very interesting flavor. And the students we have small classes, students get to know their teachers. It's a very interesting place.
And quite a few of your students are from Punjabi families, right?
Yes. We have about 25 to 30% of the population of Abbotsford is Punjabi.
Wow.
The first immigrants that came here came in 1905. So we have a very long history. We have all the cohorts of community members. The settler families are here. 5th and 6th generation Punjabis are here. We have new immigrants still coming in. We have the largest 2nd generation population of Sikhs. Children who have probably never been to India, but still have it in their imagination and are still invested in the culture and the language. And we have, the big bulge of immigrants that came to Canada and after multiculturalism under Pierre Trudeau in the 70s. And those communities have done extremely well. They've moved beyond survival into, I call the thriving situation that they're in now. We're very functional, integrated, politically astute, culturally invested community. We are not afraid of taking on big issues. As you know, all Sikhs like that. Give them an issue to
Yes, of
chew
course.
on.
I'm not surprised.
Yes. And we have a very large religious community. So we have 3 gurdwaras, 4 if you call mission, which is across the river from us. That are very thriving gurdwaras that do great business, and people still continue to go there. So it's an interesting place.
So you said about 25 to 30% of Abbotsford, the town that you're located in,
Yes.
is Punjabi background. Is this also true of the student body in the university? About
Yes.
25 to 30%?
Very, very fortunate that since I would say the 90s, we have seen a huge increase in student access to university. And the university, of course, has grown as well in terms of its programming. And so I would say we're about 25% of our student population is Punjabi. And
Wow.
out of that, about another 10% come from India to study. So we have a large international population of students, and a large number of them come from Punjab.
Wow. So I see out of 15,000, let me do my math pretty quickly.
150,000 people. Oh, 15,000 students.
Right.
Yes.
So this must be, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of any other university in the US or even the UK that has that large a number of Punjabi family Sikh students
Yes.
in its university.
Yes.
Is that the case? I'm just trying to think. I can't imagine any other.
Population-wise, we are the 3rd most ethnically diverse community of Canada in terms of population, not in terms of numbers. So I think Kwantlen University and SFU in Surrey have large populations of students as well from the Punjabi community in Surrey. But in terms of, if you look at the number of students that come to UFE and the number of students who are Punjabi, we're very, very high. And we have the largest population of South Asian people living in the census metropolitan area. So it's a very, very large community, and people are still attracted to coming here. We still have consistent new immigrants settling in the city. We have chain migration. People who've come here sponsor their families. We have young people coming as in the educated class, wanting to come to Canada to get an education and settle here. So it's a very vibrant, very interesting, not monolithic at all. We tend to think Sikhs are one type of community, but it is very, very diverse.
Of course. Yeah, well, I'm just full of questions, but I realize that there are probably people watching who have a lot of questions also. And I just want to remind you of the format for questions. We will save the last half of our conversation for a question period. And so if you have questions, and if you're new to this webinar, you'll see that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can ask your question there. And then when it comes to the question and answer time, I'll look over those and ask as many as I can, and maybe group them together. So if I don't ask them in the same order that you gave them, don't worry about it. I may come back to your question. So save up you can type your questions in right now, and we'll get to them at the last half of our conversation. So one of the questions immediately I wanted to ask is, how has the university responded to this overwhelming number of Punjabi students? I mean, has it taken seriously the kind of challenges that this creates, and has it responded in any way through programmatically through courses and faculty and student organizations and that sort of thing?
Yes, the university is about 40 years old, a little over 40 years old. And initially it was a college, and then it became a university college. I entered it when it was a university college in the late 1999 is when I entered. And at that time, I found doing a survey of courses that only very few applied courses really looked at the South Asian population or Punjabi Sikh population in the region. And most of them were like social work, maybe teacher ed. There was very little other course offerings. We really took it upon ourselves to go to the university and start a dialogue because we felt that this was a community that was being ignored or omitted or neglected, however you want to call that, by the programmers who were designing programs for the university. We were not being taught. We were certainly not included in any curriculum design. no history courses, nothing was being offered other than, like I said, in social work. And that was just out of necessity because social workers were coming out of the educational system and then meeting clients that they had no information about and were starting, to create, there were issues, there were challenges, as you suggest. So initially, I think there was a bit of a shock for the university to say that this community has come forward on their own volition to demand and ask for change. But quickly, and partly because we had an amazing president at the time, Dr. Skip Basford, who's an American, but who had lived in Canada all his life, he was very supportive. And I think coming from him, the messaging went down to the deans, and reluctantly the deans met with us, and there was a bit of a push and pull in the beginning. But quickly, I think they realized two things, I guess. They realized the capacity of Sikhs to contribute to our communities. We are an economic engine in this valley. We are the bread and basket of this province, and we are great agricultural farmers. So as you know, our background as being agrarian. So they saw this, suddenly, it was like a light went off, and there was this realization that there's a community out there that we haven't really reached out to. So that was the one thing. The second was, I think.
And when was this? What year, Satwinder?
This would be 2000, year 2000.
So fairly recently, just 20 years ago.
Very, very recently, yes.
Yeah.
And so from that moment on, before we met with them, 100 people came together in a boardroom, and people just said, what do you want us to do? That amazing spirit in Sikhs, that when you ask them to come forward and put their shoulder to the wheel and let's do this, that spirit came through. And I have to tell you that the whole Sikh Studies program, the South Asian Studies program, has been developed initially on a dream. It was a dream, and on that dream, people put money in that dream. They said, what do you need? We raised $1.5 million within a year and a half. Wow. And we didn't have anything. We didn't even have a course. We had nothing. We literally said, we're going to build it. And people said, build it, we'll come. And the government saw that it was happening. But I have to say also that India as a nation was rising on the world scene. And I think the work that we were doing was in tandem with that growing realization of India as an economic power. And the stars kind of started to align themselves, both in terms of political, economic gains that India was making on the world stage. And we started off with looking at economic and business courses. It seemed like the logical place to start. And the government was funding research chairs. So we offered to raise the money to establish a chair, much like Dr. Kapani. And we raised 1.5 million. The government gave us a matching grant, and suddenly we had a research chair in Canada, India Business and Economic Development. Wonderful. But soon as we did that, we realized that the chair could not exist by itself. So a group of us got together with the Dean of Graduate Studies and said, can we start some courses? And I'm happy to report that they were, keen. The dean was very keen and said, let's do it. Let's make some courses happen. And initially we started with migration and identity politics. We didn't really go into religious studies because we didn't have a program, although there was one course that was being taught about, Eastern philosophies. And we had just had this sour taste in our mouth in British Columbia from the stuff that had happened at UBC. In fact, when we started raising money, that was the big question asked by everybody was, is this going to be a chair like the UBC chair? And people really wanted to steer clear of that kind of politics. And we were not interested at that moment to establish a Sikh Studies chair at all. It was a business economic development chair. And then it was around migration and history. We were more interested in that piece. We felt UBC was doing their work and they should continue to do that. But our interest was in the establishment of settlements. Our interest was in looking at how communities settle within foreign nations, especially like in the Valley, and then study ourselves. I wanted to say that at that moment, there was this pause that said, we have the luxury now to study ourselves. It had never been afforded to us before. We had always studied the other. We had always studied the West. We had, even in India, I grew up in Shimla and I had studied the West more than I had studied my own poets and my own writers. And it was that moment, aha moment, that said, we have the luxury right now to study ourselves. So from one course, we went to 32 courses, and we had a program.
Yeah, wonderful. So did you have the faculty to teach it? Do you have, is the faculty similarly 25% Punjabi or Sikh background?
Not really, no. Unfortunately, we don't have that. The courses that we teach and the faculties, one of the professors teaches 4 or 5 history courses, another one teaches anthropology, another one teaches English. So when we started out, we didn't have the professors. I started teaching a couple of courses initially, and then we went to the deans that said, your next hire has to be a South Asian Studies scholar. And they, to their credit, did that. So we hired about 5 scholars within a period of 2 years, and they then built the courses. There was already a scholar in history who was teaching, so Dr. David Milabar, he continues to teach India. But we also wanted to, as you said in your opening, that our interest was not just study India as a region or South Asia as a region. We want to study the diaspora. We want to study the here and now. We want to study the history as well as the contemporary issues. So we had a broad range of topics that we want to study. And our students were thirsting for both the history as well as the current moment. And we developed those courses over time. And then we developed Punjabi language. That happened, I think, about 5 years into the program. It's a certificate course, but you can take it to, and students, a lot of Punjabi students who have oral Punjabi but can't read or write it, are interested in learning it and think that they would get better grades because they might be able to master that course better. They don't always do that, but that was their interest.
So was an academic program of Sikh Studies established, or a department, or what is the situation now?
No, it's not a Sikh Studies program. It's a South Asian Studies program. So it has Sikh Studies in it. We study Sikhs through history, the lens of history, and through anthropology, and through even English. But it is not a Sikh Studies program per se. We don't have a religious studies program at UFE. There's no way to place that. Now, a few years ago, about 5, 6 years ago, we did go to the dean and said, what if we raised, how much money do we need to raise to start a Sikh Studies program? And she said $3 million to endow it. So we haven't taken on that big task. But it's always in the back of our minds. We should do something.
Yeah, would you think the university would see see that it would be in its own interest to do this on its own? You would think, but sometimes it takes external money to kind of prime the pump to get the university's attention that this is an important issue that they need to take notice of.
Yes, you need champions. You need people up in the positions, administrative positions, who will champion your causes. At the same time that we were establishing our chair here, our attentions were a little bit diverted because we also established a campus in India, in Chandigarh. So we were also running, full speed, establishing a full degree campus in India. So Sikh Studies took a bit of a backbench for those 5 years that we did that.
So tell me about that. I mean, I lived in Chandigarh for a couple of years of my life. I taught at Punjab University, so I know the town fairly well. Although I have to say, I've been to Chandigarh recently, and boy, has it changed. Whoa. When I was there, of course, it was brand new, and it was just all empty, and there were dust clouds, and
yes.
And now it's beautiful. The trees have grown, and it looks like a garden city.
It is.
But tell me about this campus in Chandigarh. How does that work?
Well, our premier of the province, as I said, when India was becoming a world power, every premier of every province wanted to go to India. And it's a bit of a performance as well. They go to India, they go to the Golden Temple, they go to Chandigarh, they show photos, and then the the voting public, sees that the premier, our chief minister of the area, are interested in India. So you can understand that political influence is greatly felt in British Columbia of Sikhs and by Sikhs. And so when one of the premiers was going to India, he was taking with him vice chancellors from universities to go and establish relationships and faculty MOUs, etc. in India. So they went to Chandigarh, as is normal. And over there, one of our colleagues who studied in Chandigarh met with the Punjab University's vice chancellor, and they asked us if we would establish some sort of coursework with Canada. And it started from there. So we have a campus in SD College, which is one of the affiliated colleges of Punjab University.
I see.
in Sector 32, and we run a Bachelor's of Business, we run a Bachelor's of Computer Science, we run a Bachelor's of Arts, and we run a number of post-baccalaureate certificates. So students can come here and go into a master's program. Because India, the BA is only 3 years. So to go into a master's, you need 16 years of education. So we provide that 1 year that they need to get into a master's program in North America. So we have students who are coming from all over India now. It used to be mostly Punjab, but they come from all over India. They spend 1 to 2 years at our campus in India, and then they transfer to UFE.
I see. So everybody who's in that program, including and I guess it's mostly people who are in the Punjab already, or in India already, will eventually come to your campus in Canada to complete their education.
Mostly about 85% come. There's a number that don't ever leave. Their families want them to run their businesses. They just want them to have a Western education, applied program. In India, the bachelor's degrees are fairly rote learning. They're fairly not as applied. They're very theoretical. So we provide a very applied program. And it's word of mouth now. We've been there 17 years. So your students tell their cousins, and the masi, the chachi, the mama, everybody gets to hear about it, and the students word of mouth are coming into the program. And so it's a very robust, very interesting program. We have most of our professors are trained here, but they teach in India, and then we send professors from here to go and teach over there.
Well, I have a technical question that probably nobody else is interested in, but since I was in the Punjab educational system for a while, I know that usually the university controls the syllabus, the courses that are taught in the colleges. And do you have some sort of exemption for that?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do have an exemption. And so our courses are through the UGC. They're approved to be teaching because we're a pathway program. So India does not interfere in any manner. Well, it is our courses that are taught over there.
You're very lucky in that then.
Yes, I agree.
It can be maddening to be under the system where you don't really have control of your own courses.
Yes, I agree.
Well, this is extremely interesting, and I see the time is moving quickly, and I did want to move on to your own research because I find that equally as fascinating. But first of all, tell me how you got into this, because your background academically is not in Sikh studies or Sikh history or Indian history or even Canadian history, and you do all of this work. But tell me about your background and how you got involved in this.
Well, I think Sikhi is it's a way of life. It never leaves you. It's not just because I have a PhD in education doesn't mean that my interest, my passion is still, even when I studied my dissertation was on Punjab's multilingual policy and how it might influence Canada's bilingual policy. So my interest in Punjab and Punjabi and Sikh studies is just because I'm a Sikh and I practice it on a daily basis, and it informs my everyday activities, my thoughts, my principles, my convictions. And I'm also from a minority community. So my passion around activism is also very alive inside me. So I'm always looking for spaces and places where things are omitted, things are erased, things are neglected, things are by design not allowed to flourish. So that's also part of my thinking and my makeup. But I also saw that the Fraser Valley, as I mentioned, was this unique laboratory where we could have the luxury to study ourselves and then study the other and influence each other. And my work initially was in social work. I was a social worker. So my interest was to really help the applied programs come out of university with a better understanding of the population that we lived in. And through that, the serving of the populations, we would be a better society. Because I saw actually physically saw where the difficulties were when students graduated from university and didn't really know what they were going to do when they came out with the communities that they had to work with. But my interest in Sikh studies really comes from the feminist perspective, because I am also dissatisfied by Sikhi. And people may not want to hear this, but Sikhi doesn't always give me what I'm looking for. And I guess from my perspective, I wanted students to be able to understand themselves and be better humans through an exploration of their faith, and the faith not in the way that is taught in the gurdwaras, not in the way that we learn it through the text, but through a practice of living, a practice of Sikhi. So it can cover all parts of your life. It doesn't have to be just the recitation of the Guru Granth or translation of the Guru. That is part of it. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely believe that is part of it. But I really wanted to expand students' horizons around how Sikhi informs their daily practice, around patriarchy, around education of children in non-traditional fields, of caste, of how we understand what gurdwaras are supposed to do for us. It's a very complicated web because you can become really impatient because change is very slow. But at the same time, I feel like I can make a little bit of a difference. So my work is really not to go in with guns blaring, but it's really about a slow movement of change and bringing people on board, bringing them on board. So through lectures, through bringing in, the university really never brought scholars from our communities into the university to speak to our students. So bringing people into the university, average farming community family members, come, listen, let's talk. Let's hear scholars who have studied Sikhi for so long. Nikki Guninder Singh has been to our university a number of times, just because we want them to be drinking from that well of knowledge that will break down some of our barriers. We are a fairly, I wouldn't say uneducated, but I would say undereducated community of people that live here. They've come from India and they themselves probably have never been to university. So we wanted the university to open its doors. And one way to open the doors was through the idea of Sikhi, the idea of what is Sikhism? What does it mean? What does it mean to be a Sikh in a larger multicultural society, interfaith society? So my approach is very different from maybe traditional Sikh studies.
And wonderfully so. I mean, you're an activist as well as scholar, and you have a real concern for people, for human lives, and for community. And your research also, just looking at your background, a lot of it is on the diaspora community and problems within the community, which is really wonderful to see. But some of it is also in history, like the Komagata Maru incident and the Gunner Party. And how does that figure into your interest?
Well, I raised 3 children in Canada. So I'm born in India. I came when I was 20 years old, but my children are all born here. And I remember looking at their social studies when they get to grade 10 and 9, and I would say, waiting for that moment of when they would say, now I'm studying my communities, now in my social studies. And in grade 10, I was shocked to see that there was only a quarter page on the Komagata Maru and there was nothing else. And I think that spurred my interest to go to the ministry and say, you're doing a deplorable job of talking about a population that has contributed to Canadian society in a great manner, both economically and socially and politically. And so it started there that I wanted to study why our history is not represented.
And for people who don't know what this Japanese ship has to do with Punjab history, can you just briefly tell everybody what that is?
Well, Canada has had, a long history of migration since the early 1900s of Sikhs coming from the colonies or from India. And of course, being under the colonial power and this being a colonial daughter as well, Canada being established at the time, Canadian laws were made so that to prevent people coming from certain parts of the world. And there was a law called the Continuous Journey Law, which said, without naming race, it effectively stopped people coming from certain parts of the world who were not white. And so the Komagata Maru was a challenge to that race. It was called the Guru Nanak Jahaz later on by the Gurdit Singh, who chartered the ship from Hong Kong to come to Canada. And it sat in the Burrard Inlet for 2 months in the height of summer without ever actually making it on shore. So the passengers were sent back. There was a big, court case at the time, and the Fraser Valley, people in the Fraser Valley raised money to fight that court case. That's why the Gurdwara is so important, and that's why a Komagata Maru permanent exhibit is important at the Gurdwara, so we can mark that moment. And so my interest has always been that the history needs to be told, because not only do Canadians not know our history, and that maybe can be excused, but we can't excuse it when we don't know our own history. It is our own fault. It is our own discomfort that we have to feel that our own history is being neglected. And I am so impressed by so many people who are doing such good work to build our historical records. Dr. Holly in Calgary is doing so much work to bring the history of Sikhs in Alberta forward. That is, it's been lost. It's been relegated to some archive somewhere that no one is looking at. And so my interest in history is through that lens of omission and erasure. And I want to make sure that I'm a thorn in people's side to say, come on, look around you and look in your classroom. I have to tell you that today there are teachers in our system who are also Punjabi, who are also Sikh, and I bow to them that when they say, I'm teaching Sikh history in my classroom. It is not in the curriculum, but I'm allowed to teach certain special topics, and this is my topic. And I'm going to challenge the system if it says I can't do that. And there is white supremacy, there is white hegemony. We have to understand that. We're fighting against that all the time. But it has to be an active engagement with that.
I'm just so impressed with all that you're doing and all that you're saying. And I always ask everyone I talk with at these conversations how you define the field of Sikh studies, but I've already gotten a glimmer of that from what you've said. You see it as an active field, something that's closely related to the community, something that is a gadfly. It's something that should provoke and to stimulate thinking and identity, and not simply some abstract subject to be taught. Am I correct? And would you?
You are so correct. You are so correct. You are so correct. I really want to challenge us to question Sikhi and question it in a way that is relevant to us today. Mm-hmm. I feel like young kids aren't going to study the Guru Granth at that level. There will always be only a handful of scholars who will study the Sri Guru Granth at the same level that we establish at Sikh Studies. But I still want I want students to enter into the Guru Granth. I want them to have an opening. The book has unfortunately become revered to the point of inaccessibility. And I want access. I want students to have access to Sikhi. I want them to have access to its history. I want students to question why. I taught Punjabi school for 12 years. And the one thing I kept telling the students was, come with a question. Come with a question, come with a question. They would even ask questions like, why do I have to cover my head? Why do I have to remove my shoes? Why do I have long hair? These are the questions we need to continually be engaged with. I absolutely agree that we need the more complex theoretical study of Sikhism, and that must continue. But I want it to be a daily questioning and a provoking of ideas that needs to happen. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, that's not happening.
And you're making a difference. And that, of course, that's significant. Professor Hawley at Calgary has asked a question. He, as you know, as you said, he's doing a lot of documentary work in Alberta. And so he was asking about your work or your colleagues in the University of the Fraser Valley, whether you're trying to document this early history and maybe do oral histories and collect this kind of documentary historical work that's so archival work that's so important.
Yes, we have now, since the last 10 years, we've been recording the histories of both, settlers have passed away. The early settlers are no longer with us, but second and third generation settlers, their stories. We have about 500 interviews done, and a number of them are online, and they're just simple interviews of simple lives of simple people. And then we are also spending this 2 years since last year, we're developing a South Asian Canadian digital archive. And the digital archive, I hope, will be pan-Canada, where we can take the archives of all the provinces and all the communities where people settled and put it in one place so people can actually build a scholarship. Right now, our archive is very scattered. And if it's so scattered to the point that we can't actually bring it together and make coherent sense of it. That's why Michael's work is so important in Alberta. There's work going on in Ontario. There are pockets of communities where no work is happening, but we need to ignite that. So archiving and documenting histories is absolutely one of our key cornerstones of our work. And we also don't just want to record the histories of known people or political leaders. That's fine, that's important. We want to record the simple stories of sawmill workers and women who were barred from getting jobs at the local stores. Racism was rampant. Our relations with the First Nations people, our relations with Hindus and Muslims in our communities. That history needs to be recorded. And it is a simple history, but it is a complex history in the sense that when you sit down to study it, so much more can be done. Even the Komagata-Mru, I think we've done a lot on it, but it is such a complex history, we could spend a lifetime on it.
You said that some of these archives are digital. Can they be accessed by anybody online?
Yes, absolutely. That's the big goal, right? In this new generation. I mean, when I remember wanting to look at the Gadar papers at Berkeley, and I would have to go there to see them. So now everything is online, and we want to make it available. We have 3 websites. The South Asian Studies Institute website takes you there. If you go to our website, through that website, you can find the other sites where all the research is established already. The digital archive will be ready this year at the end of the year, and we'll do a big launch so people can see it. I know UC Davis has some work, Yuba City has work. We want to link up. The Pacific Northwest has a very continuous and contiguous history of early settlers, and a larger project that connects all of us would be amazing.
That sounds wonderful. Someone helped to create that resource of gutter history at Berkeley. I'm delighted that you found it useful and we were able to get those materials. But you're right. It's too bad you had to physically go there. And increasingly, we're able to do these kind of searches online. It really makes scholarship so much more accessible and so much more interesting.
Absolutely.
There's a question from Amrik Bumrah about the immigration from India. You said there's a lot of relatively new immigrants. He wants to know whether the political situation in India has created this problem in any way.
Well, British Columbia is a hotbed of political movements, as you know, since I think early 1900s. We've had where unfortunately there is a divide in Sikhs right now in British Columbia. I think we can overcome the divide, but the politics of India creeps in all the time, and we are a very politically astute as well as media savvy community. We have a plethora of television shows and radio shows and programming going on, and people wanting the podium. Give a Sikh a podium, and they won't stop for 15 minutes. Here I am as well. But the Sikhs, the migration of Sikhs has always been attached to political history, always. We had a big movement after partition. We had the early 1900s because of colonialism and the work in the colonies. We had 1984 was a very strong moment. We have continuous history of migration going on right now. The farmers' movement in this moment is very active in British Columbia. We are doing a study on it to see what is the diasporic response to the farmers' movement and why is it there? How do agricultural laws in India affect us here? Punjabis in British Columbia are immensely invested in India, continuously invested. Not every Punjabi, but a large population is continuously invested, both through media, both through politics, certainly through economics, certainly through familial ties, through heritage, through migration. So British Columbia is very, very much at the front end of migration, has always been. It's the beachhead of migration for Canada, and it continues to provide that opening for Punjabis and Sikhs to come from India here.
Amrik Bumrah has a follow-up question, and that is, with this new immigration comes, and on one hand, the kind of multiculturalism that Canada is very proud of, and that certainly many in America are also very proud of, but also the backlash. We've seen backlash against that in the United States and a rise of white supremacy, and in Canada as well. Has this affected your program, and have you found ways of dealing with it?
I mean, the backlash for us, we politically, we have stayed apolitical as an institute. We try not to take sides. We have 3 gurdwaras in Abbotsford that are constantly pulling at each other's legs, and we want to stay away from that politics. So our work is really guided by the idea that we can overcome our shortcomings, that we can agree to disagree. Not everyone is willing to be at the table, and we're okay with that. And Khalistan, the idea of, it came up recently in the farmers movement, the idea of continuous migration of women that come as partners to men who live here, that continues to raise its not ugly head, but has become not a problem, but it is a challenge in terms of settlement and patriarchy. We still have not young, I would say middle-aged people coming from India that continue to manage our gurdwaras in the same way that they were managed, 100 years ago. And the change that we want to see is not seen in every gurdwara. So we are affected by migration even today. And I think if Canada were to shut immigration doors, which I don't see happening because we are a very small populated country, if migration has been a boon to Canada, but it has also been a challenged by white Canada. White Canada, it was supposed to be a white country. Laborers were supposed to be brought in from China, Japan, and India to do the work, but they were never supposed to continue to live here.
Not from the perspective of Native people. From the perspective of Native people, they're all outsiders coming in.
Yes, but we're still othered. We're still foreign. We still have hyphenation. There is still the othering going on. I'm always saying at everything I talk to is I'm a full Canadian. I'm integrated in every facet of Canadian life. If you still can't see that, then there's something wrong with you, not with me.
Yeah.
And we do have to turn the mirror. I feel that the mirror has been focused on immigrants for too long. And I think the mirror has to be turned over to the white supremacists for them to come forward and find change within them. As an immigrant, I'm constantly being told to integrate, to assimilate, to find ways to become opinions about Canada need to be formed. I need to be a citizen in this way. I agree with them. I need to integrate into Canadian society. But I want Canadian society to also look at themselves, how their barriers are preventing that integration as well. So it is a dance that's fraught with missteps and stepping on each other's toes. Luckily, we don't have the same kind of issues as America in the sense of very deep, entrenched, racialized examples of violence in America that we see. But please don't ever believe that we are a post-racial society. We still have racism, anti-Asian racism came up in COVID. We are constantly having national conversations about racism. We all have that backlash, but we all have to take a stand against it. And I think the better process that Canada has shown through multiculturalism is, and multiculturalism has its flaws, but one thing it has shown is the idea of solidarity, the idea of understanding each other's experiences through our own. And that's why I would like to see a Pacific Northwest program that talks about how migration has even affected the movement of people from California all the way up to British Columbia, especially for Sikhs.
Yeah, that's well said. Professor Lou Fenich has a question following up on actually something you said earlier about the issues of patriarchy within the diaspora community. And so he's asking whether, particularly when some of your students go to the Gurdwaras and then they encounter a kind of a patriarchal system that particularly affects your women students, and how you've already talked about that a bit, but you want to say something more about how you deal with that and how you see that as an important issue to be struggled with.
Yeah, I think all of us as faculty and as educators or as community historians, whatever work we do, I think we can't just put it on academics to make the change. I think our work is in conversation and dialogue. Our work is in establishing processes and places for people to come and hear people talk. And we are also role models. I want to see young women do well, come out of their workplaces and take on the world. And we have seen an amazing recognition of women's work in Canada, in BC. recently, not as far back, I would say, but recently. And I want to say to you that this Vaisakhi event we had with our premier about 3 days ago, there was about, I would say, 50 people on the Zoom call. And out of that, I would say 40 of them were young women. Women, not young, women. And he commented that these were the who's who of British Columbia, and look at all the women here. So the change is going to come through us, by us, with us. We can't expect that men are going to make the change. The status quo is going to shift and is going to be demanded to be shifted by us. You know, if I sit in a comfortable spot, what motivates me to change? Nothing. I have to make that discomfort. I have to make it uncomfortable. And at some point, I guess, for our young generation, young women, once they see role models, you can't turn the clock back. Once they've experienced this, you can't turn it back. So the goal would be to have women and men come together through this journey. You know, it only works if we all come together. I see some amazing Sikh leaders who are men, but we need more. They're not enough. Every Sikh man needs to come forward and really follow the teachings of Guru Nanak. It's wonderful to talk about it, but do you practice it? It's wonderful to bring out Guru Nanak's, you know, one quote that everybody quotes, but there is much more to it than that. And I guess we want to hold people accountable for their practice, for their Sikhi. And not just words, not just through words or through tradition or through culture or through recitation of the Guru Granth or going to the Gurdwara, bowing. I have to tell you, you know, the Gurdwaras, young people go to the Gurdwaras for their own reasons, but they don't go for the same reasons that elderly people go. And the Gurdwaras have no clue, have not contributed in any way to including those young, not all Gurdwaras, but a number of Gurdwaras have not done that. And I'm very critical of that.
What do you mean by that? What are the different motivations of young people?
I mean, young people go because it's a cousin's wedding or a family's event, or there's something, they might go if there's an exam and just go pray. Even I think that doesn't happen very much anymore. But the elderly people go because it's a ritualistic approach. It's like, I must go to the house of the Guru and I must sit in Sangat. And I absolutely agree with them. But everybody at the podium, every Granthi, every person is a man. Our voices are not coming out. We are not, there's no place for women in the Gurdwara other than in the kitchen. And I find kids aren't that interested anymore. Sikhi is taught through mythology and through interpretation. But whoever's interpreting that, if it's not resonating with me, you know, I'm not that interested. So I look at my own, you know, if the number of people around me that are young, and I ask them, would you go? And they said, you know, maybe, but not that interested.
Because they don't see their own lives reflected in the same way in that
not at all
structure.
Not at all.
And you're absolutely right in what you say, that the problem with patriarchy is not a woman's problem, it's a man's problem. And it takes men to change it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, women are changing. In my classroom, I have to tell you, Dr. Juergensmeyer, that in my classroom, the women have left the boys behind. The way they're thinking, their thought processes have moved forward. And the young boys are still trying to catch up. And we need them to catch up because we don't want to leave them behind. Then society is again weak. We are only the sum of our good, strong links. So we want to create those good, strong links.
Maybe it's time for a women's Gurdwara. What would happen if that?
We don't need a women's Gurdwara. We just want a Gurdwara where everyone feels that they are supported and that they feel that their voices are heard and that they're not tokenized.
Yeah.
And that their role is not just relegated to a certain margin of society. Right. But that I would love to see, you know, we don't have Sikh Granthi women. I would love to see women become Sikh Granthi. It's very complicated, but, you know, more of that.
Yeah. And why not? What's to keep a woman from being a Granthi? I don't understand.
Well, the occupation of Granthihood is very complicated, right? The occupation is very, very complicated. So We don't have a school of theology. We don't have local granthis. We have people who can, young women, obviously, who can sing the the Kirtan and give lectures and give sermons, but they're not employed by the Gurdwaras. They do it in their homes and in other people's homes.
Well, you're talking about things that are needed in the future. 5 years from now, or even 10, how would you like to see things different?
Oh, that's a complicated question. But I think one thing I would like to see is more thinkers, more gatherings of thinkers, more gatherings of people who can think through the problems and find solutions and lay those solutions out. Because we're applying old solutions to new problems, and they're not always working. So visionaries, people like Dr. Kapani and others who can think ahead, I would like to see a people from the Sikh community gathering for the betterment of our society. And there are, please don't get me wrong, Khalsa Aid and others are doing amazing work. Sikh Coalition, American Sikh Coalition, our own United Sikh Coalition in Canada, they're doing amazing work. We need more of that. In 5 years, I hope those organizations are so sophisticated and so well developed that people go to them for advice, go to them for instruction, go to them for information, go to them for practice, and not to the powers to be that we have today.
Mm-hmm. I meant to ask you a practical question, and that is how you work with other communities and other academic communities in British Columbia, with UBC and Simon Fraser and
yes.
Victoria. I know there are forms of Sikh studies at each one of those institutions. Do you have kind of collaboration?
Oh, very much so. We're very fortunate that we're a small country, we're a large geographical country, but small in terms of population, that we are able to have very strong, very well-developed relationships with all the universities and our colleagues, and we meet regularly. We do joint programs, we do research programs together. We have, festivals and occasions to meet, but also through conferences and symposiums. We have a very robust relationship. We don't have it formalized. We've just started a South Asian Canadian association that's going to be part of Congress. And of course, Congress hasn't met in 2 years, but we are establishing a Canadian association because we really need that. But Sikh Studies programs that established at UBC and UVic and SFU and others, and Kwantlen and Langara, we meet regularly.
If somebody wanted to study Punjabi in British Columbia, where would they go?
They can come to SFU, UFE, Kwantlen, UBC, Langara. There are a number of places. And K-12, our K-12 system teaches Punjabi in the school system. So from grade 5 to 12, you can take Punjabi as a program and graduate with it.
And so you do teach Punjabi at your university?
Yes, we have 7 courses, and we're just starting 2 more on literature.
Amazing. I'm impressed. And a lot of students in those courses?
Yes, luckily and happily. We have lots of students enrolling, yes. And the international students also enrolling now in some of the higher level courses. So they're interested in looking at language as well.
And if you were in UBC, in British Columbia, and you wanted to do graduate work in Sikh Studies, what university would you recommend?
I would say you'd have to go to UBC. You might have to go to UBC and otherwise, but it's not at SFU or UVic. We don't have the scholars. And even at UBC, I mean, Anne is probably the only scholar that can take on a student. We need more scholars. We need more people to come forward and take Sikh Studies. First of all, they have to graduate, then they have to become professors. So it's a complicated, long-drawn process.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a political conflict, and I know the situation involving a community raising funds for an endowed chair and then not being satisfied with the kind of research that the chairholder was using. But Sikh Studies certainly continues at UBC. It has not been abandoned, as you said.
No, and it's very vibrant. And I think the Sikh Student Association and others are really politically active. In fact, we've had another kerfuffle last week with UBC, bringing in somebody from India who was going to give a talk, and the Student Association, raised their flag and said, no, you're not doing that. So politically, we are very, very active. We are not afraid of turning the stone and asking for questions. So it's very vibrant, very alive.
So you see Sikh studies having a future in Canada, as it was
Always.
around the world. How do you see it changing, and how would you like to see it change?
Mm. Oh, that's good. How would I like to see it changed? Hmm. I'd like to see Sikh studies become more visionary about the future. I'd like it not just to be in the past. I'd like it to be studying what does Sikhi mean to people in the future? What does it look like? Because I think we have that unique opportunity in the diaspora to be a bit more objective. I think if we were in India, we might look at it differently, but we're looking at it from a lens of both being in the West and maintaining an Eastern tradition. And what does that really mean? And perhaps that is the fusion of the future that says we are well informed, and through that information that we have collected and gathered, that how do we interpret what Sikhi looks like, both as a religion and as a practice. So I think the scholars should come forward and can come forward to create a bit of a pathway for us. I feel like that's the next phase that we're looking for, and I think it's happening. We need to get on that pathway, but if that pathway could be a bit clearer for us, that would be very useful.
Wonderful answer. Dr. Satwinder Bains, this has been such a privilege. I'm just so impressed with all that you've done and are doing. And I've been so inspired by your words. A couple of people have commented that, what you've said has just blown them away, So you've inspired, I'm sure you inspire your colleagues and your students, and you've inspired all of us. And so we are grateful for your leadership, and we look forward to the continuing leadership in the years to come. So thank you so much for joining these conversations.
You are so kind. I truly appreciate, and I appreciate everybody that joined. And I thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And bye-bye. We'll see everybody else in 3 weeks for our next session.
Yes, thank you.